A new version of Betaflight is almost here. Betaflight 2026.6 just hit release candidate. And that means it's time for us to take a look at what is coming in what is, frankly, one of the most exciting Betaflight updates that I've seen in a long time. I'm Joshua Bardwell, and you're going to learn something today. Yes, I have flashed this version of Betaflight to a flight controller and checked out most of these features, although I will admit to not having flown it yet. And if you're thinking you'd like to try it out as well, I do need to let you know this is a release candidate. What that means is that it is feature complete and hoped to be bug-free, but the whole point of a release candidate is that they put it out there in the world because a lot of times there are bugs and little bits that need to change. And so if you're thinking you'd like to try this out, just be aware that you're flashing something that still could potentially have a bug in it. So, take necessary precautions. That being said, release candidates usually don't have major show-stopping bugs, and there is some pretty cool stuff in this version of Betaflight. Everything we're going to look at in this video is here in the release notes for Betaflight 2026.6. There's a link to that down in the video description below, and if you want, you can just go read them, but the whole reason you're watching this video is you'd rather I read them, think about them, and then show you just the highlights and give you my sort of insightful commentary on them. So let's get into it. And if you want to check this stuff out yourself, you can do it right now by going to master.app.betaflight.com. app.betaflight.com is the URL for the standard Betaflight configurator. That is always the latest released version, but master.app.betaflight.com is always the latest master build. And what that means is that here, when we're in the release candidate window, it is fairly stable, but then as development continues, it will always reflect the latest build of Betaflight, which oftentimes, especially in the middle of a development cycle, could have just all kinds of crazy stuff in it. So don't make a habit out of going to master.app.betaflight.com, but here specifically when we're in the release candidate window, it's relatively safe to do. There's one major bug fix in Betaflight 2025.6, and if you have this piece of hardware and you flash Betaflight 2025.6 and don't make this change, then your quadcopter will not fly right and will potentially be damaged. A bug fix applies to anyone using an IIM 42652 gyro. If you have that, you have to reset your PIDs to default and retune them. The reason for this is that the gyro was previously misconfigured and it was reading basically twice the rotational rate that it should have. So when you went to tune your PIDs, you tuned them to like twice as much as they should be. And now that the Betaflight devs have fixed this, your PIDs will be way too high and your drone will fly away or burn a motor. So you need to check whether you have that gyro. Do not fly on your PIDs. Start on the defaults, and then you'll have to re-PID tune from scratch. And the first thing you're going to see is that there are a lot of changes in the UI of Betaflight Configurator. The Betaflight devs have completely rebuilt the app with a different underlying sort of framework. The framework that was used for the Betaflight Configurator app was very restrictive and old, and that was one of the reasons why cross-platform compatibility was complicated. It's one of the reasons why they switched from a standalone app to a web-based configurator or a web-based app. Progressive web app is what they call it. And it's one of the reasons why updates to the configurator were slow. And a lot of times you'd be like, hey, why don't we change this thing? And the answer would be, yeah, but the configurator is such a freaking mess, nobody wants to touch it. Somebody finally bit the bullet and completely reworked the entire app, and it is so much better. Like, in a lot of ways, it feels the same, but like it just looks fresher. But then in a lot of ways, things have been reshuffled in ways that make more sense. Once, of course, if you're not used to them, you will not like them at first, but they've been reshuffled in ways that make more sense. And it just feels like a much more mature and better organized app all around. The Flight Plan tab introduces new autonomous mission waypoint capabilities for Betaflight 2026.6. And if you're thinking, holy crap, that's major, Betaflight for the longest time hasn't supported autonomous flight. They've been very focused on acro and racing. Well, the times they are a-changin', I guess. You should know that this is extremely preliminary and is not intended for use in the real world. In other words, you can set up a waypoint mission and you could tell your aircraft to fly it, but the devs explicitly are saying, don't do that. The only reason this is here is so that people can start poking at it a little bit in the simulator, in the software in the loop, if you will, and start sort of shaking out bugs and capabilities. It is extremely preliminary and not very functional at all. Like, for example, if I click on one of these waypoints, the only waypoint type is fly over. That is all you can do. And then we can only put altitude in as MSL, above sea level, not above ground level. And there's no real indication. Like, it's so freaking preliminary. So the idea here is that, like, in a year or a year and a half, this will be mature enough that Betaflight will actually have meaningful waypoint mission support. For the time being, if you want that, I would recommend running iNav, or, well, ArduPilot is even better, but iNav will probably run on your Betaflight flight controller, and ArduPilot may not. If you want to ignore this warning and try out autopilot anyway, here are the instructions for how to do it. And I'll leave you to figure those out, because you really shouldn't, and I'm not going to help you. I'm not going to be able to show you the AutoTune tab right now because I haven't flown and recorded a black box with the debug mode equals chirp, which is necessary in order for the AutoTune tab to do its thing. Basically, the AutoTune tab is an official Betaflight dev endorsed way of tuning PIDs. Now, is it good? It's a little too soon to tell. There are actually a lot of auto PID tuning apps that have come out in the last 6 months or so. Some of them I think are probably AI slop. And I don't mean that all AI programs are slop. I mean that some of them, I would guess, just by the sheer odds of it, the guy who made it kind of didn't know what he was doing and he just had AI shit something out. And then some of them are probably pretty good, and I don't know which are which. The fact that this is endorsed by the Betaflight devs certainly gives me a little bit of encouragement. If you're interested in seeing this in action, I'm going to put a link to this video in the video description below. This is a video by UAV Tech from about 3 weeks ago where he demonstrates the process, and I'll also get into it a little later, but I didn't want to hold this video up until I had time to get into it. We've also got Blackbox Log Viewer built directly into Betaflight Configurator. No longer do you have to go to a separate app. That's pretty freaking cool. You just come here. It's all one thing. The firmware flasher tab is pretty much the same as it's always been, but the layout is a little bit different. Down here in the lower left, we've got, what is this? Login. What am I logging into? Oh, let's find out. If I hit login, I can create a account with Betaflight tied to my email address. It validates my email address, and I'm going to go ahead and sign in with a passkey that I created previously. And that gives me the option to do two things. I can save flight controller backups to the cloud. They are organized by aircraft, and I can download, edit, and delete the backups straight from the configurator. So if I have a drone and I want to back up the config, I don't have to back it up to my laptop or my computer and then lose it. I can just save it to the cloud, and then I can easily download and restore it at some future point. Well, I have been poking at this for about 10 minutes, and I cannot figure out how to make a backup appear here in the cloud backups. Maybe that's a function that hasn't been implemented yet here in the release candidate window, or maybe it just, I'm too dumb to figure it out. But you have here a user profile, and you have the ability to have backups per drone and easily save and restore them. And that's kind of a cool thing. You don't have to use it, but if you do decide to use it, it's there for you. Betaflight has always struggled if you use both lithium polymer pouch cells and cylinder cells, commonly called lithium ion batteries. The reason that it struggles is that pouch cells go down to a minimum of 3.0 volts, whereas cylinder cells can be run down to as low as 2.5 volts, more or less. And the reason that matters is that Betaflight's power and battery configuration only had one setting. So if you set your low voltage warning for a LiPo, you would be seeing warning, warning, land now, while your cylinder cell still had a lot of life to give. On the other hand, if you set your low voltage warning for a cylinder cell and then you went to fly a LiPo, you might fly it all the way down and crash before you got a warning. Well, just watch the voltage, people. Just watch the voltage. But those warnings are helpful because sometimes you get busy and distracted. Betaflight 2026.6 now supports battery profiles, and if you use iNav or ArduPilot, you're going, duh. But for Betaflight, this is a new feature. We can set battery profiles, and all of this information here, including the minimum, maximum, and warning cell voltage, is changed with the battery profile. So we'll call this one LiPo, and then we'll hit save, and then we can switch to battery profile 2, and we'll name that one lithium ion, and change the minimum to, let's say, 2.7, and a warning of, let's say, 2.9. And then, depending on what kind of battery you're using, we can change the battery profile and have the correct warning levels. Betaflight does support the ability to auto set the battery profile based on the cell count. When you first plug in, if you have a 4-cell Li-on and a 6-cell LiPo, it can automatically detect that. But if you're working with a 6-cell Li-on and a 6-cell LiPo, you'll need to manually change the battery profile. You can do that from the OSD, or you can probably do it using in-flight adjustments. Yeah, can confirm. You can change the battery profile with in-flight adjustments. So you could assign it to a switch on your controller and change that automatically to get your warning levels correct. That's pretty freaking cool. It would be great if there was some way that it could auto-detect whether you're using a LiPo or a Li-on without you having to manually change it, but I'm not sure how that's possible. Betaflight just sees a voltage and that's all it knows. Some of the improvements to the app carry over to mobile. So the new app interface is more responsive on mobile and just has overall better usability. In addition, the Android app is now fully functional. You used to be able to use the Android app to configure flight controllers, but it couldn't flash them. Now it can flash in DFU mode directly from the Android build, no extra tooling required. And it basically makes the Android Betaflight app a complete replacement for the desktop app, except when you go into the CLI, typing on your phone screen can be a little bit tedious. But for those on iOS, there is an app that is built and signed and distributed via test flight, but iOS doesn't allow access to the USB serial port, so the Betaflight devs have come up with a thing called the Betaflight Bridge, which is a Wi-Fi to USB bridge. This is a device that you build, or presumably someone will start to sell it. You connect to the Wi-Fi using your Apple device's Wi-Fi network, and then it basically does fully seamless pass-through, including flashing and so forth. So you could have full configuration options even if you're doing iOS, which is something that hasn't been available not very much until now. Do you hate the Betaflight Progressive Web app and wish there was just an app you could download and install on your desktop, just like you used to be able to? Congratulations, you can do that again now. The days where Betaflight was only available as a Progressive Web app, basically it's 6 months and now it's over. This new reshuffling that they did to the app allows them to release it as a standalone app as well. I'm personally going to stick to the web app. I find it easy to use, easy to install. I haven't had any bugs or problems with it, and I like that it automatically updates when a new version comes out without me having to download a new installer and run a new program. But if you want to download a standalone app, it's available from downloads.betaflight.com. At this time, you have to download the nightly build because this hasn't been released yet. That's okay to do as long as we're in a release candidate window, right? Because the release candidates are relatively stable. When that actually releases as a stable release, it'll show up down here as latest stable release. Currently, the stable releases only show the Android app. By the way, that's where you can get the Android app if you're interested. But if you want to download the configurator standalone app, it is here, Betaflight app 2026.6.0. And after that actually releases, it'll show up as latest stable release. Another cool thing in the Power and Battery tab is that Betaflight now shows the real-time power draw in watts. Now, in order for you to use this, you would need to be connected to the flight controller and like spinning the motors, which of course is its own risky thing to do, but maybe you've strapped it down or something. I don't know. You could see the power draw and you can see the voltage drop. It will try to calculate the voltage drop. I'm not even sure how it would do that since it's just reading the voltage that it sees, but basically if you throttle up, start to pull power and the voltage drops, it'll tell you how much sag you're experiencing, and that might be useful for evaluating battery health or something. We'll have to try that out in the real world to see how actually accurate it is, but it's cool that it's there. Keeping with the trend of adding more autonomous flight capabilities, Betaflight has added optical flow support and altitude hold support using the UPixel UPT1001 Plus optical flow and laser rangefinder sensor. This is another one of those features that iNav and RGPilot have had for a long time, and Betaflight has traditionally ignored. The advantage of optical flow and laser rangefinder is that it gives you position hold and obstacle avoidance when you're indoors. Right? Indoors, GPS may not work. Optical flow is basically a downward-facing camera that looks at the ground and can tell when you're drifting side to side, front to back. Betaflight has added CANBUS support. Most hobbyists will not care about this and will not be running CANBUS peripherals, but when you get into the larger drones and the long-range world, CANBUS peripherals are more common. One of the big advantages of CANBUS is that you can just run a bunch of peripherals off the bus without having to connect every peripheral to every individual UART and so forth. They just all connect to the CANBUS bus and then connect to the flight controller. So it simplifies wiring, and I'm sure there are other advantages that I don't really know about because I don't really play in that world. Betaflight has added support for a whole bunch of new flight control hardware, including ESP32, and the ESP32 Room. These are simple microcontrollers that are commonly used by hobbyists who want to play around with programming Betaflight and don't want to dip their toe into the a little bit more complicated STM32 world. They've also added support for the STM32H562 and H563 processors, as well as ST's Nucleo H563ZI development board, which I'm just reading these off. I don't actually know, but basically, it's harder and harder to find microprocessors to run flight controllers. The world is getting more expensive and stuff is being redirected. There's more demand. Demand for drones is going up, and people who want to manufacture a flight controller are finding it harder and harder to actually buy the microprocessor that they need in order to make the flight controller work. The same thing is true for gyro sensors, by the way. So by adding support for these processors, it makes it a little bit easier for manufacturers to find hardware and manufacture hardware. Will these be better? Will they be cheaper? I don't know, but more options are always nice. There's also preliminary support for a whole bunch of other microprocessors that are not really intended to be used. They're just for development, so maybe in 6 months or a year, those will be relevant to us, and we'll start buying flight controllers that have them. There's also one more addition that is super exciting, which is the Raspberry Pi Pico 2. There's some people who want to run a flight controller on a Raspberry Pi because the Raspberry Pi can do additional processing. It can do AI image processing and some other things that are difficult to do on an STM processor. So rather than having a flight controller running an STM32 and then a separate Raspberry Pi that's doing your image processing, now you can just run the whole flight controller on the Raspberry Pi, I guess, is the idea. And in addition to that, if you have a favorite gyro, like the good old MPU 6000, you may have noticed it's harder and harder to get the gyro that you actually like. And in fact, I've seen several rounds of, I can't get the MPU 6000 anymore. What's the next good gyro? And then sometimes a shitty gyro comes out, and flight controllers that have it have all kinds of problems, and then everybody's like, oh, I don't want that one. We've added a few more gyros. Are they good? Are they shitty? Only time will tell, but the ability to buy gyros at a reasonable price and put them on flight controllers is kind of essential. And these days, if you're not in the manufacturing side, you may not realize how hard that is sometimes. So thanks to the Betaflight devs for adding some more gyros that we hopefully can use and hopefully then can be able to continue to buy flight controllers. Betaflight 2026.6 has full support for ExpressLRS 4.0 SPI. So if you have a flight controller with an SPI-based ExpressLRS receiver, you finally can get official support for ExpressLRS 4.0. However, in order to do that, you will need to flash your flight controller with the use_ELRS v4 option. You do that by going to Firmware Flasher, and then here in Custom Defined, use_ELRS v4 is how you would type that. Crossfire telemetry now includes full resolution motion data, accelerometer, gyroscope, barometric altitude, vertical speed, magnetic heading, and 3-axis GPS velocity. And keep in mind, if you're using ExpressLRS, you are still using the Crossfire wire protocol. It's ExpressLRS over the air, but Crossfire on the wire, so this benefits you as well. The advantage of this is, I'm not sure. It means that the telemetry data will now include much more precise indication of where the aircraft is and what it's doing. But what are you going to do with that data? Oh, it's for ATAC. It's for ATAC. If you're running your Crossfire telemetry into an ATAC tablet, then you'll get near real-time updating of the, yes, it's for ATAC. If you don't know what ATAC is, then this probably doesn't affect you. If you use Betaflight with Q ground control, you may have noticed that it's shitty and doesn't work real well. Well, now it works better. Betaflight has expanded support for Q ground control. It's still fairly basic, but it's at least basic, as opposed to just kind of not working very well. This is a feature that is not going to seem that cool at first, but I think really opens the door to a lot of interesting possibilities. You could now read and write any CLI setting using the MSP protocol instead of having to go into the CLI and send that information via ASCII text. This is going to make loading and saving configuration dumps so much more seamless. Like, I don't know if you've ever had a case where you tried to load a CLI dump and it just glitched and didn't load some of the characters, and then your config was messed up. Or even worse, you save a CLI dump and it glitches and the text file is mangled and your CLI backup isn't useful. It's just corrupted. Now that information can be saved over MSP and loaded over MSP, and it just takes a lot of the BS out of it. It's fantastic. More importantly, it means that third-party apps can access any information in the CLI by sending MSP commands instead of only the standard subset of options that were predefined for MSP support, which has potential for future possibilities that excite me. If you use servos, you can now easily map any aux channel to any servo, bypassing the servo mixer and just having the servo directly follow the aux channel. It basically cuts Betaflight out. It cuts a lot of the BS that's involved with Betaflight servo setup out, and you just have the servo follow the aux channel, bing, bang, bong, you're done. And it's any of them. Super easy. Blackbox logs are now timestamped with the GPS time so that Blackbox logs can be correctly synced with external data as long as they all have a consistent timestamp. Or Blackbox logs can be synced with each other. Or just finally, Blackbox logs have timing information in them so you could know what time it was when you flew the log. It's fantastic. Well, it's fantastic for me because I've come back from a day of flying with 27 Blackbox logs and had to carefully, forensically sort through them to try to figure out which flight was which. All right, that's not the only stuff that's in there. There's a few more things and you can scroll through it if you want to, but for now, that's going to be as much as I think it makes sense for us to dive into. Thanks as always to the Betaflight developers for, frankly, all this additional hardware support has to have been a massive amount of work. And it would be easy as an open source developer to go, why would I do that? I'm just going to focus on the cool stuff like the flight performance. But these guys are putting in they're doing the hard work to get support for hardware so that we can buy hardware and have hardware to buy that isn't ridiculously expensive. Well, it'll still be ridiculously expensive, you know that. But this is stuff that isn't necessarily sexy, like oh, we added Waypoints capabilities. That's sexy. But adding new hardware is not sexy, but it's necessary, and I really appreciate it. The configurator update, I'm so excited that the configurator finally feels fresh and finally is going to be updated, and just like, I feel like this is one of the best updates Betaflight has done, even if there isn't necessarily like, well, who am I kidding? There are killer features. Auto PID tune, that's a killer feature. It's like, this is a great update, and I'm super excited to dive deeper into it. And when I do that, that will be on this channel. So I hope you're subscribed. Didn't think we were going to get through this without a call to action, right? You're subscribed, right? Okay, cool. I'll see you in the next one.